Hey everybody, it's Tom Duff with St. Louis Counseling. Check us out at stlouiscounseling.org. Today I'm going to talk about some simple tips and techniques to mental health. Why? Because we all have mental health. On an everyday basis, we all experience mental health, and it is normal, just as normal as we all experience physical health. So, the topic today is this past year has made me feel different. I hear that question a lot from everybody, really. Not even question. It's more of a phrase, I guess. But I hear that from so many different people. So the therapist in me wanted to explore that a little bit as well, too. And a lot of people say, I just can't put my thumb on it, but it's just not the same as it was before COVID. And I think that's a pretty normal thing to hear. And I agree with that on so many points. So when people come into therapy, right, and I'm going to give you your own little kind of concept of what therapy is, and sometimes we as therapists, how we deal with this, because people on their own can deal with some of these things too, and that's why it's a little tip and technique for you at home in that sense. So the therapist in me can just say, well, why? So hey, this past year has felt different, and me as a therapist say, why? Which is sometimes a great question to start with. But a lot of times that's an overwhelming question, because a lot of times you can have a flood of emotions that's going on, a flood of thoughts, I should say, as well, too. And it's like, I don't know where to start. And so a lot of times I'll say, like, just start somewhere and we go from there. But at the same time, for you at home, and you're listening to this, some questions that I would ask you, if you make that statement and you're trying to figure it out because something within you just doesn't feel right, in that sense, and you can't put your thumb on it, I would kind of start bringing it down into these questions, right, to be able to help you answer this for yourself. So one, time frame. I would kind of differentiate between pre-COVID and now COVID, right? And then now we're even in vaccination COVID world in that sense. But I would look at those two time frames in that sense, and I would do some compare and contrasting from that perspective. So I would ask also, how have you handled change throughout your life in general? All right, because this year has been full of change. So maybe what feels different is like you've had to do a lot of adjusting and changing in that time. That also goes into the question of, well, how flexible are you of a person? Do you easily go with the flow? So change is hard when we think about it, but on a daily basis, how flexible are you? I would ask you to think about that as well, too. So have you had to be more flexible during this past year compared to previous years? How do you or did you interact with your family members? And is that different now than it was pre-COVID, in those pre-COVID times? Do you have different interactions with coworkers? And how are those interactions different? Is it now your interaction? We have the same amount of interaction, but now it's virtual instead of in person, or now it's both. Those are questions that you could dive into to peel back the layers, because this is what it's about. We're peeling back layers. How is your job different than it was then? So you may be feeling something's different. So how is your job different? What activities or milestones did you miss out on last year? We know there's lots of stuff going on, but there's also just the everyday activities. Definitely milestones were celebrated differently, and maybe that's what feels different in that sense. Did you experience any symptoms of grief, and did you lose people during this process? And did you lose a lot more people than you normally would in a previous year? Same thing with milestones as well, too. Are you grieving over those loss of milestones? Did you have big letdowns throughout the year compared to previous years? And were there more of them in that sense? So you were very excited to go back to school August, whatever, and then nope, you're not going back till November. That was a letdown, right? You still got to experience school, but that was a letdown. You didn't get to go back. You got quarantined during the season of basketball, and you missed out on several different games that you wanted to. Your work environment experienced many more quarantines than you were expecting in that sense. All of this goes to say is this: look for a pattern within yourself, right? And if it's a pattern that you can't break out of, then come see somebody. Come see a professional at St. Louis Counseling and come talk about that. Help us guide you through that process. These questions are important ones to ask yourself. So if you're dealing with something just feels different, and this past year has just really made me feel differently, and you want to know why because you feel it's impacting you, drill down those questions. And these are just a few of the questions that I would start with. Now, within any of those questions, such as how did you interact with your family? Are you interacting with your family differently? Each of those has subcategories, sub-questions that you dive into, right? Because you may not have seen family during milestones. You may have been only around your very immediate family and you're used to being around extended family, so you talk about that. You didn't have the family reunion like you thought you were going. Those are all things you dive into. And that is how you begin to figure out what is different from one year to the next and why you might feel different. Feeling different is not bad either. It doesn't have to be a bad thing. Feeling different can be a very good thing. It just means it's an adjustment that you're going through. So the bottom line is this: explore that within yourselves. I always am a big proponent in that concept of know thyself. And the better you know yourself, the better human being you are, and the better human being you can be to others in this world that we live in. So remember, if you're curious about our services, check us out at stlouiscounseling.org. And until next time, this is Tom Duff. And remember, mental health matters.